Anytime.
Amid one of the worst droughts on record, that includes January and February, the driest months we've seen in California in more than a century, there's a new study that finds the Westaldsn water district that supplies nearly $5 billion in revenue and 35,000 jobs in the Central Valley is in danger of not having the adequate water supply for farmers, and some high-level forecasters believe the water supply remains uncertain and volatile, and there could be irreparable harm to disadvantaged communities. So many of those communities make up the Central Valley. We want to welcome in Dr. Michael Shires, a professor at Pepperdine University, also an associate professor for public policy there at Pepperdine University. You were a big part of this report. Thank you for being here. And I just want to start by saying this. I want to simplify it because the report is real thick. I have it right here, as you know. You've been working on this. The Westaldsn Water District, it spans over a big chunk of the western side of the Central Valley. So what are we really talking about here?
Well, I mean, kind of what we're talking about are whether the state's priorities for its water use, right? And I mean, it's really the implications of that water use into the community. I mean, this report documents, as you mentioned, the almost $5 billion and 35,000 jobs. But it goes further than that, and it talks a little bit about how fragile these communities are and how important these jobs are to these communities.
What in the data that you saw that really makes up this report disturbs you the most?
It's probably lost opportunity. I mean, it really is the number of acres we've already fallowed because of limited water supplies. But it goes beyond that to kind of look at what the lost economic opportunity is. I mean, you're talking about almost 8,000 jobs, for example, if we were to put the land that's been fallowed because of a lack of water into production.
You know, I'm wondering, in the report, you say it could cause irreparable harm to disadvantaged communities. What exactly could happen, and how soon could that happen?
Well, I mean, if you have another couple dry years and you don't take actions now to set aside water and to get new water supplies and to better use the water you have, if you don't do those things, you end up with a scenario where you could see literally tens of thousands of jobs disappear from the region. And, places, towns like Huron that are heavily dependent on agriculture for their community and for livelihood, I mean, all of that goes away if the jobs go away.
You know, I'm wondering, and I know you're a professor of public policy, nowhere in the world does it say politics in that, but water is politics, as you know, in the state of California. Why hasn't California been able to figure out the water wars and to make sure that our farmers are getting the necessary groundwater to continue to feed America?
Well, this is part of the problem. It's the history, right? I mean, the state capital's location is a compromise over water. The entire history of the state is. And we're so locked into that history, nobody sat down and said, what does the future look like? What are our priorities? I mean, one of the things we've learned from COVID, what we see happening in Russia, is a reliable domestic food supply is really important. Just like having pharmaceuticals and PPE, you need to have food to feed your population. We don't have any plans in the U.S. at this point at a federal level or even at a state level to really decide how we do that in times when events converge where we don't have water and how we're going to respond to it.
No, I'm wondering, there's been a lot of talk over the Westaldsn Water District General Manager Tom Birmingham taking control over how groundwater is accounted for and to which grower accounts it would be credited to. Is this the best method when considering what's happening at this time?
Well, Westaldsn is, and all the growers in the region and all the water districts in the region are facing scarcity. And so one of the questions become, what's a responsible and sustainable level of activity? And the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act was intended to create an infrastructure to do that. And so, I mean, they are serving as the operator for that subbasin, but in fact, I mean, it's happening across the state as we manage those underground aquifers because they become really important in times when we don't have a lot of surface water available.
Should growers be in fear of him having control like that?
I don't think so. I mean, first you've got to remember that the Board of Westaldsn are largely growers, right? And so they have a very large voice in how all these things unfold. It's not just a manager making decisions. It's part of the electoral process.
You know, just recently, Governor Newsom last week added $22.5 million more funding for the Department of Water Resources, State Water Resources Control Board, and the California Department of Food and Agriculture, as you know. More than a third of that, a little over $8 million will be used to increase outreach efforts to educate Californians on water conservation measures and practices. Is that money well spent in this current climate?
It's a good start, but it needs to be part of a big plan. We need to maximize the water our urban users use. We need to recycling, gray water recycling, things like that. But we also need to be smart about how we're using the water we have on hand. And that's one of the challenges. We just don't have a plan for that. And what happens is it becomes random. Growers find out 4 weeks ago, oh yeah, there's a 0% allocation this year. There needs to be a baseline that they can plan around so they can plant the crops that we need to eat. I mean, California grows 80% of the nation's fresh fruit and produce.
So what's the best solution? I mean, yeah, education is one thing, but what's the solution?
Well, the solution is going to be, in some ways, to put aside that legacy, historical mishmash of pieces that result in these kind of random policy decisions and put forward a plan that conscientiously says, how are we going to manage the water we have? And then also, I think, and we have the capacity, how do we find new sources of water? How do we bring more water to the state? But more importantly, how do we conserve water? I mean, I'm told in Southern California I can water my lawn 2 days a week. Well, there's no enforcement, and quite frankly, nobody knows whether I'm doing it or not. We need to get serious about those kind of measures.
This is a very detailed report, and I'm wondering if you ever sat in front of Governor Newsom, what would you tell him?
I would say let's sit down and figure out new ways to do this. The current system where it's all competitive and we use the courts to litigate everything doesn't produce the best outcomes. We need to sit down and say, do we want to eat? Do we want to protect the environment? And then how do we balance all those things off? And more importantly, how do we use the techniques we have? I mean, one of the things about working with Westaldsn that I've been impressed by is they're very efficient with water they have. They've been forced to be because so many years they haven't gotten it. And those lessons can be used by other growers across the state. Other regions of the state can learn those lessons. I mean, there's conversations about covering up the aqueducts, for example, so you reduce evaporation.
I'll finish with this couple of seconds, and I'm wondering, the federal government, has it done enough to open up the water supply on the federal pumps?
In my opinion, no. I mean, I think that the challenge is this. We haven't made our food supply a top national priority yet. I think looking at Ukraine, looking at COVID, it's time that we start thinking about what are the things that are essential to our society thriving. And it's not just manufacturing jobs in the Midwest, it's the food we put on our tables. And I think at the end of the day, somebody said, I could change this, the title of this report to Why Crops Matter, because we like to eat. Yeah. And we need to have that in our federal policy conversation.
All right, Dr. Michael Shire, appreciate the time.
Great to be here.
All right.